everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to, I've been told, our first all virtual panel. I'm really not here. I'm my hologram. So again, this is the second part of a series highlighting, this one will highlight the role of state and local governments, what role they will play with federal broadband funding programs. And joining us virtually are 4 solution seekers that are answering the calls in their state and local communities. Because let's face it, as one of our panelists will affirm, and there's a prize at the end that Chip will give you if you can guess which panelist said this, that broadband access is truly a house by house, street by street, community by community issue. Again, there's a prize from Chip at the end if you can guess who said that. He just learned that too, so it's going to be interesting what that prize will be. Joining us is Stanley Adams, the 2020 State Department of Commerce Employee of the Year. Stanley, I don't think I've met a State Department of Commerce Employee of the Year, so hello. Stanley works to identify broadband gaps and extension plans as a director of the Office of Broadband Development, guess where? In Kansas. Next is Mayor Steve Benjamin. I will embarrass him to say that I've known him since he was 19 years old. He served as a 44th mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, and is the former president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the African American Mayors Association. And Ernesto Falcon, who I rely on too often, I'm surprised he has taken my call, as the senior legislative counsel at Electronic Frontier Foundation. He focuses on open internet, broadband access, intellectual property, and competition policy. And last but not least, you saw her earlier in the day, is Peggy Schaffer, who's the executive director of ConnectME, as in Maine, and manages the authority's rulemaking efforts, investment decisions, and policy recommendations. Welcome to INCOMPAS 2022, the Policy Summit, everyone. Good to see you. Stan and Peggy, let's start with you. Can you speak of your, let me warn you, I ask compound questions because I'm a compound person. So can you speak of your roles, the work you've done over the past year in each of your offices in respective states, and the challenges you may be facing looking ahead for this allocation when it comes to new infrastructure funding? Let's go with Peggy since we've seen you early in the day. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think the challenge that we face is the same as most states, which is most of us had a very small broadband program, and now there is significant amounts of money flowing into the state, right? So our broadband grant program is what has been about $1 million a year. This year we have a little more because we use some CARES funding, but the money coming in now is $150 million this year and more the following year. So that's a huge chunk of change. We've been working very diligently to put pieces in place. We've been, we do community planning. We've been doing it for a number of years, like sort of say, if we don't have any money, you plan. And so now it's good because all those plans are ready to go for when this new money comes. And the other thing that we've been doing, because we sort of anticipated this federal money might come, we've been putting in place systems within our own infrastructure to help us manage some of these grants. Now we're going to have to beef those up. But we've been working diligently over the past year to make sure that we have a good place to start for this money.
Stan, same question to you.
Yes, thank you. I would say the main folks under Peggy's leadership have been much harder at it, and for a longer period of time at least than we have. My role in our office and we definitely are one of our challenges is staffing. But our role is to be the coordinating agency for the state or entity for the state to try to bring some consolidation to the different efforts across what you all know are the key sectors that really were highlighted during the pandemic in healthcare and education and economic development, transportation, public safety. The list really does go on. So we wanted to have a way to at least have a central coordinating office to try to bring some organizing to the chaos, if you will. And then also recognizing that the funding pipeline was definitely being filled, we have set about developing a state strategy that gives us a roadmap for how we want to focus these resources to truly close the digital divide in our state once and for all. And that's across the state from every corner, rural and non-rural. The question about challenges, I think I agree with Peggy's points as well. I think one of the challenges that we are going to have is making sure that we do a good job of trying to align the different funding mechanisms, because each of those funding mechanisms has tweaks and turns around the criteria. And we've got a strategy that says we want to close the digital divide. So the challenge for us is to make sure that we are able to bring all of the funding mechanisms into a focused effort to close that divide.
So Stan, let me say with you and then with Peggy. So if I have to pick a word for the two of you, I'd say coordination. So what has worked well with your offices in coordinating communications and projects with the state and local governments? And can you offer any advice for what the private sector, there are a lot of private sector people in the room, should be doing with your offices? And lastly, again, I told you I'm a compound kind of gal. Just how important is it to establish these relationships early on in the process? So Stan?
You know, I'm generally long-winded. Compound questions don't get me in trouble. So right. I would say
I got a solution for that.
Oh, okay. Okay, so what we've done, it's been a challenge. The communications piece of this is a little bit more challenging because we would typically do a lot more in-person engagement. So we've been enrolling webinars a lot more frequently to communicate with stakeholders, service providers, local and state, local and regional county stakeholders as well. That's been working fairly well, and certainly using our website and just promoting the visibility to the information and making people aware that we are here as a resource. So that's worked well. It's one of the things that's a work in progress. I think we can do more in that area. In terms of the private sector, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to our offices, our respective offices. I hear from some providers and I don't hear from others, and I don't know what the method to the madness is, but I can tell you that it is really, really helpful for us to hear the service provider's perspective about how they view the world in terms of expansion, so that we can do a better job of tailoring our efforts to be complementary to what ultimately the providers are the ones that are putting the fiber in the ground. So we think that it's a really big help if you can reach out, and just sometimes it can be just a courtesy call, but to the extent that you're willing and able to share strategic vision of where you're trying to go, I think we can also help facilitate some conversations at the local level, because the broadband offices, we hear it from both sides of the equation frequently. So trust us when we tell you we're here to help.
Thank you.
Peggy, anything to add or augment?
Yeah, I think, in Maine, we're a pretty small state and we know all the players, but we work a lot with communities. We have a good understanding of what's happening out there because we do planning grants, and we talk with all these people all the time. So we talk with providers, we talk with communities. And so really, we don't bite, right? Reach out, talk to us, give us some advice. We don't know everything. And really, we can help. We can play a matchmaker in some. We've done that a lot, and we can continue to do it. And just, understand that we have restrictions around what we can do and what we can't do, because we have statutory and rules and stuff like that. And we'll try to help as much as we can. But it's we live within a certain realm, and we can help you figure out that realm.
Thank you. As a former mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, and former president of not one, but two association of mayors, Mr. Benjamin, I have to act like, that it's before 5. It is before 5, isn't it? Can you share your own experiences with being awarded federal and state money, and how can mayors across this nation work together better to ensure that the infrastructure funding is allocated in the most effective, cost-efficient, and timely way? And when you can add on that, any lessons that you have learned that could provide this audience insights into how this works on a local level. And it's good to see you again.
Always good to see you, Commissioner. And yes, everyone, I've known the Commissioner since I was 19 years old. She's been bossing me around for over 30 years. I'm used to it.
Yeah, there you go. I'm glad that's on the record. Thank you.
I'm used to it, and usually sometimes people volunteer to do these things, and sometimes you're voluntold to do it. And when you're on
Absolutely
there, it's a I tell you, we're in a wonderful place, a wonderful opportunity, and just to piggyback really quickly of the last question you asked, Commissioner. And it's so important that when business leaders, when private sector leaders come into I saw this in my time as mayor, when people come into the conference room, usually they have more data points on my city than I have in my own city. People come prepared, they know exactly what they're talking about, but so often they immediately go into pitch mode and start selling something, as opposed to my grandmother would say, God gave you two ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You're supposed to listen twice as much as you talk. The question should start with Madam Mayor or Mr. Mayor, what keeps you up at night? What are the issues that are driving the community right now? It's amazing if you focus your solutions on solving those problems, the trust you build that then grows significantly. So I would always say, ask those questions first. We're at an amazing point in American history right now. We're seeing untold sums of capital coming back into our cities. I always make it a point that when I visit with your dad or others, to make it a point. So these are dollars that are being repatriated. 85% of American jobs are in cities and metro economies. 89% of our population is there. 92% of America's GDP created there. So we're finally seeing a significant down payment on the trillions of dollars of infrastructure needs that have just manifest themselves over the years. And we're at a point now where we have 19th century infrastructure in many cities, 20th century solutions to address and manage that infrastructure. And now we have 21st century technology. We've got some money now. The mayors who've been in DC every year asking for infrastructure and infrastructure week. Finally, the dogs caught the car. And now we have to find ways in a thoughtful way to receive the money, according to obviously the rules that comes onerous, and then deploy that money in a way that allows us to do this truly as a posterity play. Even with billions, or you look at the entirety of ARP and infrastructure and CARES, trillions of dollars, these are still a significant down payment on what's a much greater need. So how do we think, I think, very strategically about how we're very goal-oriented, how we're very holistic in our thought, how we're cooperative and working together against these man-made lines of our jurisdictions, how we're very iterative, transparent, and how we ensure that everything we do is human-centered and equity-focused. Going forward is really the challenge before us. How do we chew gum and walk, build a plane and fly at the same time? Those are the real challenges between each and every one of us. And we were speaking offline earlier about we're going to need a whole lot of help. Our benches need to be larger and stronger. And hopefully we can be very strategic, again, realizing that there's still a role for everyone to play here. The public sector, the private sector, first in money from philanthropy. There's so much to be done here. When I was president of the Council of Mayors, I established the Mayor's Leadership Institute in Smart Cities at the Wagner School at NYU to really help mayors focus on when the resources came, and thank God they came in the Biden-Harris administration, on how we would deploy these resources in a way that allows us not to create some of the same problems we made with investment in the past. We have a real opportunity to change our communities for a long time in a much better way. So I know that's the way my former colleagues are thinking about it, and how, as I speak to and advise a number of them, I'm asking them to think long term. This is a posterity play.
Well, and Mayor, as a follow-up, even though you have answered this, other than being a good listener, I'm wondering, are there any, particular, when it comes to requirements or criteria, when it comes to ideal partners? What are you looking for, other than a good listener and good partners? Are there any particular attributes that would get you to yes?
Absolutely. Obviously you want competency, and so many folks have shown they can deliver. But you want partners who live within the values of your city, and I say that very very seriously. Those that are inclusive, those that find ways to think very creatively about as you're delivering this infrastructure. Infrastructure is the backbone of America, but broadband is a spinal cord. We have seen now just over the last 2+ years how, in fact, the pandemic alone has illuminated all these amazing broken bones as an X-ray of American society. If we're going to have partners to deploy, again, these untold sums of capital coming into our cities, there need to be partners that understand our cities, that understand our commitment to inclusive growth, understand our commitment to equity, understand that in terms of contracting and the partners that you bring to the table with you. We want a diverse set of partners, and I mean that with every degree of sincerity. And we've used it. That, quite frankly, I did as mayor along with my council to choose our partners and to tell people we're not doing business with you because you chose not to come to the table with a diverse set of partners that represent the diversity of a city that boasts folks from literally almost every one of the sovereign nations of the world, speaks 90 different languages, significant Black and Brown population. If we want to pick partners that live within the values of our city, and that value of inclusive growth and inclusion is important.
Thank you for that. Ernesto, continuing on my compound question theme, or that's my DNA. With your work at EFF, can you speak on your positions regarding fiber and the importance of investing new infrastructure funding in future-proof technology in communities? Do you see that as important for multiple technologies that are relying on it, including 5G deployment? And with online demand increasing and the digital divide only growing more acute, what are your observations for the benefits of fiber, increased speeds as in 1 gig, and symmetrical speeds? Welcome, Ernesto, and can you answer those series of questions?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Commissioner, for your questions there. And thank you, Encompass, for inviting me to speak. So a little bit of background on the EFF, because it helps animate the reasons why we came at these questions with the answers I'll give. We've been around for about more than 30 years. We're a mix of lawyers and engineers and activists, and we're an organization that's primarily funded by about 38,000 people across the country who pay dues to EFF for the work we do. And the founding of EFF was about 30 years ago, the beginning of the commercial internet, and how technology was changing our speech rights, our privacy rights, and a whole range of how we interact, as citizens in society. And broadband access to us, we come at it from a mindset of, what kind of connection do you need to be a full-fledged citizen in the United States? Your political activity, your economic opportunities, access to education, access to health. What's the kind of internet and connection that you need to do that? And there's I deal with compound questions even in the research. The two questions I was asked to lead research on for the organization for a number of years now is, what were the mistakes of the past that prevented us from getting there, and what does that future look like? So on the question two, the future of that is really high capacity, long lasting infrastructure that is able to stay ahead of the demand curve. The demand curve being every year we need more internet. We have proven that now for decades. That's not going to go away. The pandemic has accelerated that trend pretty significantly, particularly on the upload side. And what is the transmission medium? Not necessarily technology, but what's the means of moving data that will stay ahead of that curve for the long run? And the answer is definitively fiber optics. It's the reason why you see fiber being such a heavy emphasis in China, such a heavy emphasis on fiber in the EU. And it's because from any objective analysis, if you're going to need multiple gigabits of capacity 10, 20, 30 years from now, what's the thing you build today to be ready for that when those demands come in? And it's not going to be, it's all going to be reliant on fiber. I mean, this is the interesting thing. I think DC sometimes gets stuck with the relative different interests involved in, me first as the solution, but all industries, I think, in the broadband space are all depending on fiber as the means of transitioning towards the future. So it is the 21st century medium. It's essential as how do we stay ahead of where the economy is going and where education is going and all the aspects of how we live our lives, particularly with distributed work. I think being here to stay. I think the pandemic will enter a certain stage, but we will probably always be engaging more in remote work rather than less. And so I think the mistakes of the past, the other question that EFF really dug into is this. Broadband policy has been cursed with scarcity for a very long time, where a certain amount of money would be given, but certainly not, and everyone would acknowledge that's not enough to solve the whole problem, but do your best with this. What's the most we can do with this smaller amount of money? And often that leads to, good enough for today connectivity efforts, and very low metrics about what we're trying to achieve. And, we can reflect on all those decisions that have led up to this point. And I think the pandemic has demonstrated that we made a pretty big mistake when we did that. A lot of the subsidy dollars that went towards, say, plussing up the copper networks that were built under the AT&T monopoly era to push DSL to reach just a little bit higher of a speed, quickly was eclipsed by remote schooling, remote work needs that came, and the ever increasing demand that's placed on these networks. So often fiber is conveyed as the too expensive option, but I would say the more expensive choice is to build an infrastructure that's not going to be good enough 10 years from now, because all you're going to be left with at that point is simply to get asked for the funding or seek funding to replace that inevitably with fiber optics. I mean, and this isn't me, this isn't me just like speculating at that. I mean, I think 5G in particular is a useful exercise understanding this. A 5G network, a multi-gigabit wireless network, it's not a wireless network really, it's 99% fiber. Fiber goes to those towers, it pushes those towers awfully close to the end user, because spectrum at that kind of speed, deliver that kind of speed and capacity is reliant on shorter distances and more line of sight. So because of the frequencies they have to utilize, but at the end of the day, that tower has to have a high abundance of capacity wired directly into it in order to make those wireless kind of next generation wireless efforts feasible. So
Ernesto, let
yeah.
me ask you this, and you probably, it's a complimentary a question. I guess you are a frequent flyer when it comes to commenting in terms of different dockets and different proceedings. So I'm just wondering, and it's aligned with what you're saying, is there anything specific, particularly when it comes to NTIA's new programs that you will be targeting your comments or guidance as it relates to different eligibility requirements or suggestions or scalability?
Certainly. The federal statute says these networks have to be easily scalable and able to meet evolving needs of communities, as well as enable 5G and beyond. I think that makes sense to someone who's been knee deep in the policy to understand, like, what is that saying? I think it's really incumbent upon the NTIA and EFF has suggested to the agency to provide the technical guidance to the localities and the states who have to come up with their own plans. But what does that actually mean? And a big piece of it, I would suggest, is help predict and extrapolate what's that future internet capacity need going to look like? Because if you are under the understanding about, a gigabit sounds like a lot right now, but it won't be like that forever. And if the government was to provide proper guidance about what future planning really looks like for broadband, I think that will help a lot of these local communities, rationalize their plans in a way that look at the future, plan 20, 30 year intentions behind what they propose, and we will all benefit from that.
Thank you, Stan and Peggy. We often hear about barriers to deployment for many local service providers looking to build out their networks and reach more Americans, whether it's assessing the public rights of way or getting permits approved. What role does your office play in resolving these differences? And should any of this funding be tied to incentivizing local governments who can ensure for more timely, faster deployments as a part of this the awards process? Peggy, and then Stan.
You know, so in Maine, our real problem for that slows down deployments is pole attachment. You know, we are an aerial state. We don't vary much because we're essentially a granite outcropping in the ocean. And so and the poles are owned by private parties. Our Public Utilities Commission oversees that, and they have been working diligently for the past 5 years to simplify and make the process better. Last year, we adopted One Touch Make Ready. This year, they're working on a process to create a third-party poll administrator. And the hope is that we speed all of that process up, because that's the major, there's no local permitting needed. There's no we don't have problems with the right-of-ways. Our problems is the polls.
Got it. Stan?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have, you know, I mentioned earlier that we try to play a facilitating role, and rights of way is something that does come up. For the most part, and I can share encouraging news from our perspective, you know, one of the things that we typically would hear about is with our transportation department, but of late, when we get complaints or concerns, we have great working relationships and are able to do the kind of warm handoff, if you will, to get things expedited as needed. In fact, I think it was the USDA's Reconnect program that had created an incentive in the application process for states to have to commit to an expedited review process for rights of way as applicable. And that's when we first started to get into the mix of making sure that all from a state standpoint, everybody knew that we had this was a priority for the administration, is what it amounts to. And then I think, you know, it's a little bit encouraging because we are able to facilitate the discussions. I do think it's there's more work to be done. I wouldn't present that we solved it, but I think we've made a lot of inroads there. The issues that I hear most now are around the utilities and how to navigate the complexities there.
Thank you. And Stan, I'm going to, ask you this, then Peggy, but in answering this, part of the question that I won't, ask is, we'll say is this probably will be your final word. I knew I was going to get the Sandman hook for those of you who used to watch Apollo. So any suggestions or guidance you would provide federal agencies, including NTIA, as it designs these new programs, and any specific rules or guidelines that you both will be looking for that may be helpful to your broadband offices as this funding is allocated down to your states. Again, Stanley, this absolutely will be your final word, but that question and whatever closing comments you have. And no, I'm in the room looking at cards, but no pressure.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Commissioner. So I think in terms of the strong hot button for me would be in terms of what we would need to be helpful for us by the federal agencies and the NTIA is really helping us navigate the rules between the different programs. And I recognize all of the funding isn't coming through the NTIA, but it seems like the bulk of it is between the NTIA and US Treasury, which I think they do a great job of coordinating already. I think that's really important. I wanted my last point that I want to get in that I'm passionate about is that we, in general, all of us, as we work to improve connectivity, we've got to look at this as more than just an infrastructure issue. It is an ecosystem. It is devices and affordability. It is what I call the constructive access that makes the quality of life. It drives their economic development and job creation and all of the other things that we all know and hold dear to heart. But if we don't have people with the digital skills or the devices, the infrastructure, the billions of dollars on infrastructure, well, let's just say we can make it more effective if we make sure that it's usable and accessible.
Stan, whoever the 2021 awardee. They don't hold a head candle to you, so don't worry about that. So thank you so very much. Peggy, the same question, and with a closing statement, please.
Yeah, so, I think this, my suggestion to the NTIA is set high standards, but let states lead, right? We know what's going on in our state. We know the local solutions. We have the relationships. We understand our area much better than the feds ever will. And this is designed, especially this new NTIA money, is designed to be a state program. So let us lead. Don't junk it up with a whole bunch of stuff. Let us lead. And the final piece really for me is similar to Stan. Broadband, it really is it's a fundamental building block for equity in this country. It is how everyone has access to the same tools. And that means that we need to not only have a high quality connection, good wire running by your house, you need to be able to afford it, you need to be able to have a device, and you need to know how to use it. All of those should be part of this conversation and should be part of this funding.
Thank you so much, Ernesto. Quickly, any other thoughts you might have on the infrastructure bill and the impact this funding could have on broadband deployment? And with our audience here today, some of them are giving me that little twitchy eye look. Any concerns you may have for implementation at the state and local level and ways we could resolve this so funding is not wasted? This is your final words or whatever else you will. And I can handle myself here with this audience, but if you can make it brief, I think I'll have a better chance. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, I think the federal government has an enormous amount of resources and technical analysis and assistance in feasibility studies and things of that nature. And if we take a page from the rural electrification effort, and I think to take a note from what Peggy said right there, exactly right. We didn't do this by just handing out a bunch of subsidies and then it got built. We actually help teach people how to build it themselves. And that is going to probably be an essential component this time around. And fortunately, electricity and water are effectively seen akin to broadband access to a super majority of Americans at this stage. So I think you'll have the commitment from local groups to work with the federal government, but it really is going to have to be a partnership for this long-term planning.
Thank you so much. Amir Benjamin, this is no accident that you're going last because I'm on my way to Columbia and I want you to look out for me. So how important do you believe this new infrastructure will be on our local communities and for solving the digital divide once and for all?
It's so important. I'm so thankful that we have this leadership on the call. I'm excited about the leadership of our Office of Regulatory Services in South Carolina, the broadband, new first broadband director, Jim Stritsinger leading, because they are significantly by your father was for a long time a voice in the wilderness when it came to advocating for these resources. So indeed, they're following his lead, and we're touching some places that have never been touched. I would also obviously I have a great relationship with the state. Sometimes we would disagree. I would also encourage everyone to look at cities as well that done this right, particularly in 5G deployment. Columbia, we had a wonderful wireless policy that laid out a replicable framework for permitting wireless infrastructure. If in fact it took you 2 weeks to get a small cell permitted in our city, then in fact you had a problem. Enacting guidelines for design, permitting, and deployment of infrastructure with reasonable fees is the way to accelerate the deployment here, and something we should look at cities that got it right too, and hopefully that can inform state plans in those places where we're able to dialogue. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so very much. If you will join me in thanking our panelists, I'd appreciate it. And next up, we have Andrew Lippman, who will lead the discussion on coming from the industry point of view. So thank you again, and see one of you soon, and the three of you probably virtually next. Take care.